afternoon, everyone, and thank you for those of us who are still here, willing to stay back and listen to the last talk for the conference. And I hope we have not, got into information overload from Monday, from the workshop, and a lot of presentation yesterday and today. I'm going to be talking on look below the waterline, beyond the tip of inclusiveness. And I think this is just a very great talk to wrap up the whole conversation that we'll be speaking on today, focusing on inclusiveness across different spectrum of users that we might be designing our product for. So a quick introduction. I have the privilege to be co-presenting with Roxana Maria Babu. She couldn't be here in person, but I'm sure she's with us virtually. And by the end of the talk, she'll probably unmute and respond to some questions as much as possible. Quick intro about myself. So I trained as a pharmacist. I practiced clinical pharmacy and community pharmacy for about 3 years, and then transitioned to public health. In fact, I did my master's in public health in UK University of Liverpool. And then about 2 years ago, I transitioned fully to user experience research. And I work with academia, which is a design-led engineering consulting firm. So we support clients mainly in the healthcare industry to design products or to help them to improve on their products. So whether they have an idea and they want to design it from inception, we support with the research phase, design, and also the software development. And then also if there's an existing product that you want to improve usability, it's something that we have a team of experts that work with different clients to get the work done. So today I'll be focusing on these three main themes, designing for inclusiveness, and then how can we make our product inclusive from the beginning of our product development. And lastly, how can we support our team to actually move towards inclusive design. So I'm sure we're very much familiar with, the different users in the healthcare space. And I would just like to use this users category to introduce to us how we typically think around creating products for users and understanding their needs. So here we have Lisa Lim. She's a healthcare provider. We've heard of a lot of conversation around developing products for healthcare providers, clinicians. Specifically, the provider in context is a gynecologist, and she supports, in training residents and student doctors. And I'm sure we know the kind of technology, tools that she will need to get her job done. Electronic healthcare record system, medical journals, or websites where she can look up information about drug interaction and so on. And this lines up with some of the things we design for. Also, we have James Zulu, who happens to be an administrator, and he works as a program manager and is responsible for ensuring that there's proper supply chain of vaccine within his district. And we can all guess the kind of digital tool that he will be using for his program work, most likely analytic dashboard to view supply chain across the different clinics he's working with, and also to input inventory information for resupply and so on. And lastly, which is like the most popular kind of users that we design for the clients or the patient. So we have Ken Martins here. He's a recent father, and he's very excited to welcome the baby. But the baby have difficulty sleeping, and so after consulting as a new father, consulting with friends, he was advised to sign up for telehealth solutions. How many of us are familiar with that? I'm sure COVID has made that even more popular, that a lot of people access healthcare remotely and they don't have to go to the clinic. And so with all these available digital solutions and services that have been introduced in the healthcare space, I'm sure we are very pleased with the progress that technology has brought into people's life and even workers in the healthcare space. But before we get too excited celebrating this achievement, I would like to introduce our users. So I'm introducing Lisa to us. Lisa's need goes beyond just being able to enter patient information in the electronic healthcare records. Lisa's needs goes beyond being able to read out about drug interaction or being able to get current information about new treatments for our patients. Lisa has a progressive limited vision, and as a result, she uses screen reader and magnifier to navigate around work tools. Here we also have James, who is an administrator, but he has needs beyond just being able to input data into the database or dashboard. He experienced severe pains in his joints, and as a result, he would rather prefer to tap through the computer using the keyboard rather than using the mouse, because that is what works for him. And our clients very excited to have that support to be able to access healthcare through mobile application. But unfortunately, this tool that he has to get information about how to understand their child growth and development happens to have a lot of medical terminologies, which I'm sure is something we are very much familiar with. And these terminologies are very difficult to understand to layman. And for someone like Ken, who has dyslexia, it's even much more difficult for him to be able to grasp the tons of information provided on this platform. So at the end of the day, what's supposed to be a benefit for him ends up being a burden, and he has to call his physician every now and then. So this brings me to my point of when we are designing for users within the healthcare space, to what extent do we consider the needs of people who have various abilities to interact with our product? To what extent do we go beyond looking at their needs from the perspective of being able to complete tasks to access need? And this data is from World Health Organization, whereby we have over 1 billion population who have one form of disability or other. That's like 15% of the world population. That is huge. So we're talking about 1 in 6 users will have access need. So that means when we are designing, we are not meant to just focus on the end goal of being able to complete a task, but also look beyond that to think about what would this person, this user require to be able to achieve this goal. And it's sadly to find out that healthcare services is one of the top 10 poorly digital experience for people with disability. And this is something that requires us to look inward and start reconsidering how do we make our product to have better experiences for people with disability, because designing for everyone should be the responsibility of every person in the UX field, and not just focusing on designing for certain users and expect people with disability to just manage it, figure it out, find support, depend on other people to get navigate around products or services. So how do we move away from designing products that just meet need of certain users who are considered as the average users to designing for anyone? And that has to do with approaching it from inclusive design perspective. And when you talk about inclusive design, the focus is about designing for any user, not average user, right? So when we need to have that mindset shift of looking at our user from the perspective of whichever segment they belong to in the population spectrum to be able to successfully complete the task. And not to focus on, oh, I'm testing this product. A majority of users can complete this task. And so that means it's good enough, right? But rather looking at it from whichever segment this user belongs to, can this user achieve their task? Can they complete their task? I will give an example. So I was working with a client and they have this brilliant tool. It's a web, upgrading their desktop application to cloud-based version. And, part of the work was to work with their customers, clients, or users to see how the new tools, work, and whether it have better experience compared to the old one. It looks very great and very, usable compared to the previous one. But there were interesting findings from the usability testing. And so one of the things, we find out was that the desktop applications, they have, some nice icons, they're properly labeled, and so users find it easy, they just go to whatever they want to do, click on it, get their work done. And then the new web application that was developed, because of, constraints of real estate, according to the product owner, like, oh, we don't have, real estate, we are introducing a lot of other controls, other interaction. And so as a result, they have, a bunch of icons, they took out the labels, and the expectation was that, oh, the users are very familiar with it, they will be able to complete the task. And so while testing it, there were a few users who find it difficult to, navigate around and figure out which control, should be used for what. And the feedback was like, oh no, but they're used to it. Probably they are not our, regular user. That's why they didn't know it. But the interesting thing was that they had a workshop and they brought physicians to look at the demo and like, oh, and they were like, what is this? I'm like, oh, that's what you use for this. And the physician was like, how on earth will you expect me to know that this is used for this, right? And so it boils down to the previous design, because it was properly labeled, was able for the users to be able to know what to click on, rather than them relying on remembering what each icon represents or is used for. And so when you look at it from that perspective of, okay, we're not just focusing on super users, but we're focusing on people with different needs. So for instance, somebody working under heavy stress, and you agree with me that most clinicians, they have a lot of stress attached to their work. So having that cognitive overload to them having to figure out what interaction on the application, it's a lot of work, right? So looking at it from the perspective of how can we simplify our product? How can we make this accessible to everyone, irrespective of where they are? And also, from the presentation that we heard earlier on today from Paul, talking about how healthcare providers rely heavily on their mobile phones to get their job done, right? So when you're designing your product, have you considered that this product might end up in the hand of someone that will prefer to rely, on touch to interact with this product and will never use mouse or keyboard? What would that experience be like for such user? And the interesting thing about this is that a lot of time business underestimates the benefits of designing for everyone, the benefit of considering people with accessibility need in their design, because they feel like, oh, it's expensive, or where do we get the client? And we've had a lot of that today already, even for other kind of users to work in studies or research projects. But the truth is that when you limit your product and you do not consider accessibility, you're actually losing out on a lot of opportunities. Like I mentioned earlier on, there's a 1 billion population that are out there that might benefit from using your tools, and that is a market opportunity, right? So when we consider accessibility in our product, it's actually broadening the market opportunity for the organization. And I would like to make reference to a fact from the United Nations that stated that in the United Kingdom, 75% of companies in the financial Times Stock Exchange do not meet the basic accessibility requirements. And the interesting thing is that this organization miss out from over $147 million revenue. Can you imagine $147 million revenue just like that because you are not prioritizing accessibility? So how do we, start changing the way we design product to making sure that our product is accessible for every user? And the best approach is to start from the very beginning of our product development. And that has to do with the mindset of shift left, right? So a lot of times, products wait till when they are testing, doing QA to fix accessibility issues. Most times we focus on, okay, how will a screen reader, hear this information? We test for that. It's more about the developer's problem. They just code for it, and that is all. But from a study conducted by DQ University, they found that 60 to 70% of accessibility issues could actually be fixed at the design phase. That is huge. You can imagine that is a pure game changer. When we think about it from our work, from the design phase to consider accessibility, before it gets to the developer, we have actually solved 60 to 70% of the problem, right? And so that shows the enormous potential that we as a UX researcher, a UX designer, or generally every one of us in UX field, how our work is so impactful in making sure that everyone can access our product. So I'll focus on, those two areas, which is, the discovery and the design phase. And the primary focus is to look at it from the accessibility principle. Whatever work you are doing, whether you are involved in the discovery phase or you are involved in the design phase, consider applying the accessibility principle. These principles are, globally accepted principles developed by WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And it's very easy to remember. The pure acronym is something that makes it easy for us to be able to remember and consider applying that to our design work. So what do we mean by perceivable? It's very simple. Somebody who wants to, perceive your content through listening, how possible is it for them? So considering the different sensory of interacting with information, do we consider that in our product design, that somebody might just want to hear listen to interactions on your website or your app to be able to complete their tasks, right? And when we talk about operable, right? What are we talking about here? We're talking about making sure that irrespective of how a person chooses to interact with the product, whether they're interacting by touch or by keyboard navigation or through the mouse, they can actually complete their task. I would like to cite a quick example here. So, based on the previous conversation we've had, whereby a physician wants to work doing an examination, and they have their monitor PC beside them, how easy is it for them to be able to use their application to just use one hand, just using the tab, control, and arrow keys to be able to enter the information without having to use the mouse or use their two hands. And there have been situations whereby in the process of just relying on only keyboard to navigate around, you get into keyboard trap, whereby you are inside a container and you can't move out of that because the way the application has been developed, it has been developed for someone who is interacting with it using mouse, and they can easily move out, move out their cursor to different controls on the application. Whereas somebody relying on keyboard or the tab keys, the keyboard tab or arrow keys, is a different dynamics, right? So if you don't put that into consideration where you are designing your product, then you leave out those users not being able to complete their task. So we see how, designing for accessibility could actually end up benefiting people who do not have disability at that instant. So for a physician doing examination and trying to use the keyboard to complete a task, it's not because he's relying on screen reader to navigate around, but because at that moment he has temporary disability in quotes, just depending on only one hand or few fingers to be able to complete their tasks. And when we talk about understandable, what are we referring to? It's very, making sure our content is very easy for everyone to be able to navigate around, to be able to complete their tasks in the minimum time possible with the less stress. And we've heard it several times today about how physicians, clinicians get very overworked, especially the last presentation of, I don't know whether the last two presentations that spoke about how some clinicians, usually the A and E, spend 33 hours as like of their shift. Out of 8 hours, 3 hours of their shift using their IT tools. That is huge, right? So if you imagine reducing the complexity in them interacting with that tool, imagine simplifying that. You can imagine the amount of time you will save that physician in avoiding clerical work or administrative burden, and they will have more time to focus on the patient that they're interested in providing optimal service or best services for. And the last one is robust, which has to do with making sure that our product is compatible irrespective of the user agents that the user wants to use to interact with our product. So just to quickly, talk through what are the different things we can do as design UX professionals in this discovery and design phase to make sure that we are working towards, inclusive design. And the first one is from the discovery phase, that we make sure that our sample size, we are considering people with disabilities when we are recruiting participants. We know, yes, it's very challenging to recruit participants, but nevertheless, it is not an excuse to leave out people with disabilities. Because what happens is that when you don't involve them in the discovery phase, you are not able to capture their needs. You are not able to account for their own requirements, and you are not able to design solutions that will suit them. So it's very important that we consider that our sample size is broad enough to account for people with disability. The second one is when we're doing heuristic evaluation. Yeah, heuristic evaluation is one of the simple approaches that are very cost savings in trying to get a quick sense of how usable our product is. And also there are heuristic evaluation that speaks towards focusing on accessibility, right? I remember on Tuesday, Nabila, if I'm correct, she spoke about the Fable tool that has to do with accessibility, usability skill. That these are tools that, okay, so we have tools that can help us to make sure that we account for usability in regards to people with disability, and we don't just focus on just the general scope of usability, because the usability approach for people with disability differs, right? It's like diving in a little further, right? So the general usability, yes, is good when you meet that requirement to an extent, it improve access need and solve some of the access need for people with disability. But the truth is that they are not enough to account for all the needs of people with disabilities. So diving into also do accessibility heuristics or accessibility evaluation when we are evaluating our designs. The third point will be around validating our UX designs, which we do a lot. Do we consider people with disability when we are validating our product? How do we make sure that we consider these people when we are validating our product? our prototype. Yeah, I may say, okay, but the product, you can't test with screen reader. But the truth is that there are approaches that you can use to test your product to see whether it will be usable by somebody using screen reader. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that screen reader users are not the only class of people who have access need. Yes, they may have visible access need, but there are a lot of other considerations that if you don't test with people with disability, you will not be able to account for those ones. Example of how you can test your prototype before it even gets to development, is by doing screen reader simulation, whereby you record the navigation pattern and you have someone to do work around that prototype by just playing the recording and see whether that navigation makes sense or not. And the last step will be when we are delivering our design work report to the product team or to the dev team, right? What does that look like? Do we properly account for complex gesture such that the developers can code properly for it and makes it easier for people to be able to understand if they have to rely on screen reader to interact with your application? Do we properly annotate our designs so that it's easier for, we are not leaving it to the developer to determine, which heading has to be heading 2, which one has to be heading 3, and depending on the style guide, but we properly annotate it so that when it is coded for, it is properly coded for in such a way that it makes sense to everyone interacting with the product irrespective of their access need. And so to conclude my talk, I would like to point out 5 key steps, actionable steps that we can go with to support our team or our organization to move towards inclusive design. The first one is being intentional. It's literally like that is what will give you the energy, the fuel to overcome the barrier. You have to make up your mind that you are committed to this. And like I said earlier on, implementing accessibility in our design is the responsibility of everybody, not the dev team, not the QA people. It is the responsibility of everybody. And so when we have that mindset, it makes us to be committed and be deliberate in putting effort to making sure that our product is inclusive. And it's not just a one-off exercise, but a continuous effort to design for inclusiveness. The second key takeaway or key call to action I have for us is embracing diversity. It's very important that we are open-minded to welcoming people with different abilities and different competencies and capacity. And during our presentation yesterday, hearing about how working with somebody who is deaf or somebody who relies on screen reader makes you to actually understand how the interaction experience is different from yours. And collaborating together helps you to appreciate their uniqueness and differences, right? And that helps you to build a better product because you are not working in silos. You are not working based on assumption or just feeling like, oh, yeah, this will work, right? But right from the beginning, you are working as a team with people who have various needs. And so that helps you to account for the needs of majority. And when I say majority, I mean everyone and not just super users or average users who probably are just considered the ideal or the typical people that common users, and it's easier for them to get away or find a way around using application and not experience significant barriers. So it's very important that we welcome diversity within our team, start thinking about how do we make provision for accommodation so that people with different abilities can fit into our team and be able to work together. And the third call to action is to consider building to last, right? What do I mean by this? When you start, a new initiative, the energy is there, you go out, you start testing things or try doing things. But if you don't put structure in place, two things can happen. Most likely, maybe when you transition from that role or you leave that organization, that initiative dies. Or probably, the drive also, after a while, is no longer there. But when you put structure in place, what happens is that even when you leave that role or leave that organization, that structure you have put in place will help the team, to continue in that path of building inclusive products. And so some of the things that we can do as UX professionals is creating, onboarding modules so that everybody on our team is very, conversant with what it means to being inclusive in their design, is very conversant with what is the contrast, color contrast requirement, for product. I've seen a lot of nice looking prototypes, but when you check the contrast ratio, fail. In fact, I was testing one product and I saw this healthcare provider. She was navigating up and down. She was meant to search for something, I think a particular patient or allergy, if I remember correctly. And this user kept scrolling up the mouse, up and down, and the search box was right there. And I kept looking at like, something is wrong with this search box, right? I tested with 10 users and she was the only one that couldn't use the search box. The conclusion would have been, oh, maybe she wasn't attentive. Oh, maybe she was distracted. Oh, 9 people passed the test. So that's a great product. That's a great solution. We are fine. Let's send it, to the dev team. But I called the designer, solution designer, I said, do you mind checking the contrast ratio of this search bar? And lo and behold, when they came back, it didn't meet the WCAG guideline. It was less than 3.0, which is the minimum requirement for a non-context content image or what's it called now, control or elements on a digital application. And so that made them to look beyond, making it look fancy or look good, to how do we make sure that this meets our contract, the WCAG recommendation of having sufficient contrast. And so building to last also has to do with looking at the design system. The organizational design system, does it have, the standard, does it meet the requirement, the standard, to make sure that whenever this element or components in your, design library or kits, when they are used, any designers that make use of them, they are working towards the target, right? There have been situations whereby the color palette is actually the problem, the organization style guide. And so when the organization style guide is the fundamental problem, no matter whatever product is implemented, there will always be accessibility barrier. So when you talk about building to last, it has to do with looking at the fundamentals. What are the things we can do to set a structure in place such that we can always use this, we can always build on this, and making sure that going forward, we are inclusive in our design. Another point is having champions. Champions are very good to drive initiative, to help with making sure that the communication is not just within the team and we're not working in silos, but also to engage product team, dev team, other stakeholders in understanding the importance of accounting for accessibility in our design. And the next point, which is the fourth point, is around celebrating our wins. I'm sure we're very excited about this, right? So yeah, when we make products and we improve accessibility or we meet access need of products, please document it. Document this achievement because it's very helpful in driving change. It's very helpful in getting more commitment from stakeholders, right? So when you document little wins of improving your style guide, improving interaction for users, specifically with a particular access need, that helps you to go next and say, it would be good to have a design challenge to solve, bring up innovations for people with disabilities. right? So document this win so that you can use that as a platform to get more commitment from the organization. And lastly, the very last one, which is a very progressive call to action, is learning forward. Let's keep learning forward. Let's keep, as UX designers or researchers or professionals of whichever part we find ourselves. One of the things we spoke about on Monday about the mindset of people in UX is the sense of humility, right? That you are willing to hear from your user that this sucks. You're willing to hear from your user that this is not working, and you're willing to take that change. You're willing to look into it and fix it. So learning forward is very important to make sure that we put mechanism in place to get feedback from people with disabilities. We don't wait till when we are testing our product to know that this product doesn't work. But there are mechanisms to get feedback from people when our product is not accessible. There will be instances where people could not complete tasks on websites because the products are not accessible. But the unfortunate part is that users cannot even log complaints. There's no platform for them to provide feedback to say, I'm a screen reader user and I couldn't do this on your website. Right? I'm a keyboard user and I couldn't do this on your website. Right? So having that mechanism in place where we can learn from users on how to improve our product and make it accessible is something that is very crucial and very important. And so I hope that this call to action will find it useful and we'll move towards inclusive design as we work towards improving healthcare for everyone and also for healthcare providers. Thank you so much for listening. I would like to stay in touch, and I'm sure Roxana also would like to stay in touch. We can connect with us on LinkedIn, and this is also our email. Feel free to reach out. I would like to keep the conversation, the great conversation we've had during the conference going. Thank you. I don't know if Roxana is online and she would like to say one or two things.
Okay, let's. She is online. And Roxana, if you would like to unmute and maybe just say a few words to add and close it off. Let's see if she comes. Here we go. I think we can hear something. No.
Oh, it says connecting her side. She's having a bit of issues on there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Is there any questions from the floor? Yeah.
Just a thought. That was very insightful, and I love that you have actionable steps that we can all take away and how we can bring that change. I was thinking maybe we need some data, like we need a study for those users who, I was talking in my talk on the first day about millions missing. There's all these users who rely so heavily on technology, but we don't have access to them when we're doing our user testing or user studies. And maybe we could do a study and reach out to that demographic and find out what's missing in our accessibility guidelines, and what actionable steps or what guidelines can we build at the back of that research then for UX designers everywhere to be able to know exactly what changes or things to keep into consideration. Because sometimes it just feels like it's as big as the ocean, where do we even begin?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're interested in that, but that's something I think I would like to take action on, and maybe we could work together on that.
Oh, sure. I'm always very excited to support any work that take inclusive design forward. And so, if there's anything that we can do within the community to make sure that we improve how UX professionals can make product accessible, why not? And just to mention, I don't know if we've heard about DQ University. It's a very popular institution that is focused on accessibility broadly, from design to software, and they have quite a number of trainings that it's very useful for designers or even product managers to go through, and they provide a lot of insights on how to consider what to do and how to do it. And another resources that might also be helpful is the WCAG, that's the WCAG, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. A bit of a caution from professionals in the ally community. They say it's written by lawyers, and we understand when lawyers write things, there's so much technical information there. So if you're finding it difficult to try to figure out certain information, there's also this community, the International Accessibility, International Association of Accessibility Professional, IAAP. They have a forum where you can, put up questions. You have concerns about this guideline, this thing, I don't know how to implement this, and then you have people who have done it in the past, they share their experience, how they were able to implement some of those requirements. Yeah.
Where is this community, this IAAP?
Online.
No, is it a website? Or
yes, the website. So just Google IAAP,
okay.
International Association of Accessibility Professional, and then it takes you to their website. Is the global, like the biggest accessibility community. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Lanre. I had a very simple question. I mean, just to kind of wrap up. I just wanted to say thank you for shining the light on inclusiveness and accessibility in design. I think it's so easy. I realize it's so easily overlooked. The question I had for you was, from your experience, when you look at it through the lens that you're looking at it consistently, as a designer or UX professional, does it get easier over time?
I would say yes. I think that's the way I put it. So, typically, like when you solve one problem, most times users move to, see, this is not working, right? So, what happened is that you are looking at this to fix this problem, but in that is fixed, you're seeing another access need, right? But the beautiful thing is that it drives innovation. So when we take our mind off, focusing on, oh, this is a problem. Oh, this is a, accessibility barrier. Okay, tick off, I've solved this. And then another one surface, right? That doesn't sound like gets easier. But the beauty there is that it drives innovation. It makes us to actually think outside the box to say, how do we solve for this? And then bring up new ideas, another level of creativity, right? For instance, face recognition that we have on iPhone, it's a way for someone who, is non-sighted and having to type in numbers, they can bring the app, to their face, open their application, go to screen reader, and interact with their applications, right? So that I think the more we try to solve one problem or create, accessible product, even when it seems that it never ends, it actually brings in more solutions that are kind of very useful to everyone in the community.
Thank you so much.